All right. Hi, Jesse. Thanks for accepting the invitation. I heard good things about you from Yosef during our last conversation. Obviously, most people watching this will probably have an idea where we're coming from. I published an article on the success that Orthodox Jews have had against many problems of our civilization tied to technology, to Cain, and so on. And one concrete metric that I'm very interested in these days is birth rates and demographic collapse. Not because it's like the end all be all, but rather because it's a good metric for community strength and whether a community can survive prosperity and technology, pretty much. So far, what seems to have happened to just about every group that we have studied is that when they become rich, when they have access to technology, they start to isolate, and then the communities start to break down, and then no birth rates, and then obviously what's going to happen is those groups are just going to disappear. And we have data on a few groups that seem to be able to manage both technology and, and community. So Orthodox Jews are one example, and then also it seems that conservative Christians might be doing it, but we don't have as good like data on that because it's like a very fluid group. Like Christianity seems to be like maybe a bit too big, and it's not just all the groups are very porous, so we don't have great data. And as a country, the only country that is doing it now is Israel, and like by far, I think that the closest behind Israel is the US, that is rich and has a still and has the highest birth rate out of Israel, but it's still below replacement, like around 1.7 or something. So Israel is like more than 50% more than that. So that's something I'm very interested in. So I wrote the article to try to dig into it, and a few people reached out, and I'm happy to speak to them to try to learn more. And yeah, Jesse, you're one person who was recommended to me. So I will have a few questions about how you are doing it. Maybe you can just introduce yourself to people who are watching, and it's going to help them see why I would like to speak to you.
So thank you very much for the introduction. I'm not until you on itself, but first of all, for the name of so my name is Ezekiel. It's for Ezekiel. I was born and raised in Israel. My parents are originally from the States. I am an Orthodox Jew, and national religious flavor. There's a very big difference between what that term means politically and what that term means religiously. So I'm using that sort of as a placeholder, but with God ultimately. But how that manifests is we can get into what that means. But I see myself as part of the national religious movement. Um, I, I, like I said, I'm an Orthodox Jew. Uh, and many Orthodox Jews do. Uh, all my life studying the Jewish text and literature alongside secular studies, finishing high school and then spending in a 6 year program, which includes being a chaplain in the Air Force as an officer over there, but also many years in a seminary just for theological and religious studies. I went there for a few years as well. Um, I then proceeded to study law, uh, get married, um, leave the law firm, open up an architecture, design, and management firm, building homes and villas in Israel, there and in Tel Aviv, which also, in my mind, also relates a little to sort of the technological element also of my story. Alongside that, while for a few years my focus was, let's say, less religious, of course, still on my own personal, but less in the teaching realm. Um, over a few years back, I was talking with my father, who is a clinical psychologist. We were discussing a certain rabbi that led us to discuss contrast his ideas with Jung, which led me to find this interesting person named Jordan Peterson, which led me to this interesting pastor named Paul Vanderklay, which led me to this place called the TLC. this little corner where our paths have crossed with the same uh, similar milieu. And there I started getting connected to uh, first interfaith dialogue, but like I said, from a very different uh, uh, point of view, less kumbaya and more really both sides trying to see each other and understand each other, which to me was extremely fascinating and interesting. Seeing the Christian world in really trying to rediscover itself, and I felt that as Jews have an obligation to assist in such a matter, which also involves me with communities like Noahide as well, which is a side topic, but there we do classes, discuss, really try to develop our relationship with God. So that is who I am in a nutshell. And like you said, you wrote this article, which to me, again, hearing from a Christian perspective, a potential reexamination of its relationship with Israel, it could be that the reason what tweaked your interest was the technological element, which we could discuss. But to me, that is like definitely the kind of language I'm interested in and interested in exploring because I see ourselves as brothers looking for each other in the field. And we have to be able to see each other. But to do that, we have to, like you're saying, have to understand if the Jews are successful in doing this, is it sheer luck? Is there a theological operating system that's working over here that's allowing them to be successful? So I hope that answers some questions.
Yeah, perfect. Thanks. Yeah, I mean, I think the fact that you are familiar with TLC and with the article means that automatically it's super helpful for me to speak with you because you know the Orthodox Jewish life much more than I do, and we can speak the same language because of TLC. So that's going to be helpful. Maybe to start off, you mentioned actually before we were recording that you yourself had some thoughts about like the article and I'd be curious to know like since you have thought about it before what are like the main things.
Think about it. Like you said, there's like the weakness which I was right, which is the feeling Israel as a all over here. Uh, you know, like you were talking with Yosef as well about how the Orthodox communities, which are preserving something that like seemingly the West has lost.
Yeah,
Right now, where I would draw the line, right, with caveating that with all the love that I have for you,
yeah, yeah.
is that right? So I don't see us in the framing sort of Romans 11 as us being cut off,
Hmm.
right? As far as like when I'm reading that, it's seeing who or and Israel is now being sort of regrafted inside, right? From the Jewish side, I'm not seeing myself as like a dead branch, so to speak, right? And I'm seeing ourselves as being rerouted in where we are, right? Where there's a covenantal soil that we're connecting to, and there's like I'm not necessarily returning to Christian meaning. I see ourselves as returning to like our land, our covenant, our history, and our national life. Now, which I would say is why we're being successful in the question you're asking, but like, which also makes perfect sense that you and I theologically would see this differently, right? And
Yeah,
my general framing for that is obviously in Genesis about God saying there's going to be like an everlasting covenant with us, and in Exodus that we're a nation of priests, right, and holy nations for the rest of the world. So that's sort of where we see ourselves. I, if you don't mind, I'm going to share because when I saw your article, what it triggered in me is is actually coming from the Catholic denomination,
hmm
but something from John, where he writes. Let me open this up for a second, if you don't mind me just reading this out.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Recognize. Okay, so this is post-Holocaust. We realize this is what he said.
Hmm.
And this is in the context of Nostra Aetate changing, the relationship that the church had with the Jews.
Hmm.
So he says as follows: We are conscious today that many many centuries of blindness have cloaked our eyes, so we can no longer see the beauty of thy chosen people, nor recognize in their face the features of our privileged brethren. We realize that the mark of Cain stands upon our foreheads. Across the centuries, our brother Abel has lain in the blood which we drew, or shed the tears which we caused by forgetting thy love. Forgive us. Forgive us for the curse we falsely attached to their name as Jews. Forgive us for crucifying thee a second time in their flesh, for we knew not what we did. Right? Now, there's people that argue the authenticity of this, but this is like for a Jew is like banana, like to hear like something like that coming from like a Christian world. And to preface this, this doesn't end in my goal isn't that now that disappears, right? There's this
Mm.
beautiful thing that, and as Maimonides says, that Christianity is here to be a path maker for the Messiah.
Mm-hmm.
So when I read your article, I hear someone, and we don't have you're not signing off on these claims, but I hear someone reaching across and saying, "Whoa, whoa, 1 second! Like, who are we? Who are these people? What's happening over here? And is there so? And I would have to guess that as a religious person that you are, right? There's an element to that question which is theological as well. And if that is true, then that sort of brings up, which, much to Jacob's chagrin, because he's definitely an anti-Zionist, as a national religious Jew, the state of Israel carries a tremendous amount of theological weight as well. So while I definitely think you're hitting onto something, my framing is different than yours. But again, that shouldn't necessarily be a surprise considering I am an Orthodox Jew.
Yeah. It's normal. Fair enough. Um, one aspect of the let's say one argument that I can make within my framing that I wonder if you would also make within yours is I think the way one of the ways in which I read Romans 11, I think it's pretty uniform in the tradition, is that one of the reasons why I see um, Israel being regrafted, and I know like you don't agree with that framing, it's fine, but one of the reasons why I see Israel being regrafted is precisely because of a failure of Christians. I've tried to go through that history in the article. There are some aspects of it I would revisit given my conversation with Joseph, but still broadly, I see that the West has sort of set up a technological civilization and hasn't prepared itself to actually deal with its problems. And it was sort of forcing Jews to deal with those problems earlier than Christians would. And it meant that by the time the problem sort of ballooned up, and now we're like very concretely facing a demographic collapse, Jews have already adapted to the technological roots of those problems. So of course, like they're doing like much better than other groups that we can find. So I was wondering if like within your framing, you still see that one of the reasons why Jews are able to do well now is because of the failures of Christians.
Probably because some they want you some kind of American history, some field. What I'm saying that ultimately is like not supposed to be both of those buses. One is for Esau and one is for Jacob, and they're supposed to be working together. Jacob has felt that he needed to take on that mantle because of differences that Esau saw theologically, and because of that, that's sign we took on. However, that is not our natural mode, right? So, like the mode, there's a very good sense which the West. Uh, I'm jumping ahead for a moment, but just for in
Hmm.
regards to our framing, in Hebrewness in Hebrew is the word "gula," also means mesugalut, which means what are you capable of? Your capabilities. Being the chosen nation is we have a specific capability, and I like using the example from Pink Floyd with like
Hmm.
the picture of the glass
Yeah.
triangle, right? So capability is being clear glass to allow all the other nations for their light to shine in their capabilities, which is
Hmm.
I'm not assuming why isn't Israel like manufacturing all over the world because that's not what we would excel at, right? So I definitely think the our rabbis say when our rabbis interpret some of the text, which talks about that the two great nations in your womb, when talking about Esau and Jacob, the rabbis give an example of Judah the prince, the one who put together the Mishnah, and Marcus Aurelius.
and their relationship together. And that is like sort of the model that I believe we're supposed to return. When Jacob sees Esau and they hug and they embrace,
Mm-hmm.
Esau goes on and says, "Come with me." And Jacob says, "I'm going to come later on." So, like these conversations that we're having right now is the later on. That's sort of how that conversation happened. But going back to what you're saying, correct? Because well, first there's the first fail of the people of Israel, right? Destruction number one, destruction number two, we get kicked out. So that's obvious, right? So like we messed up. Aside from that, then you later on have this question with how is it working with the West? There's a discussion in the Talmud, which is I don't know if Yosef mentioned this, but that it's sort of Rome is on trial. And there's a discussion with the rabbis who are building roads and building bathhouses, and they're saying like, look how much we did for the world, and the Jews said right, but the roads were for taxes and the bathhouses for brothels. But ultimately, God says yes, but nevertheless, like this infrastructure can be used for holy things, and that's why we're appreciative of that thing as well.
Mm-hmm.
So you know, and this will bring us into our conversation about technology in general, which is, we don't, the Jews, right? The material world is not something that we're trying to escape, right? Ultimately, it's something that we're always going to try to sanctify. So, like, it's not that I'm anti-state or anti-technology, right? I don't work with those things. Judaism ultimately wants to know how they could serve God, and technology needs to be placed inside of that, right? So I need to have
Mm-hmm.
technology in Torah and Shabbos and family and lands, and this is sort of again, technology isn't evil, but technology can never become sovereign. But we're not nervous about interacting with those things. Now, again, just to close with the bow, what you were saying, yes, I think that the failing of Israel led to well, I don't know if it led for their. I would claim this is also what was felt by the Christians, right? No more prophecy, uh, uh, corruption inside the temple, and the no more prophecy specifically, or as the Talmud says, there was no more Shekhinah, right? That presence is not around anymore. In my interpretation, that is felt by the whole world, right? And there's a vacuum which could then get interpreted to, hey, you guys literally killed God, right? Like your behavior made him being removed from our feeling, so we don't have that moral line anymore. We then have Rome, we have Christian Rome, um, but you are correct that potentially, while there is truth and divinity inside Christianity, which I can't deny. As Gamaliel says by there, if it's from heaven, it'll be successful. Be like you're suggesting that at some point, some of that, let's say, divinity was corrupted by. You could use different words to fill in over here, but the question is the operating system of Christianity, Christianity as such, there's obviously different denominations, doesn't have the tools also to deal with it. Now, I would argue both that historically, right, in the Bible, we already have tools for that. Like there's the infrastructure for that. And you as a Christian who the Old Testament is clearly part of your canon, then you too, of course, have that information as well. He's also adapting to things as things go on. And here too would say in Judaism, our mechanism of dating halacha allows for, the divine source, biblical source, to still be interpreted and yet maintain its divinity, right? So as I could give it a new interpretation and still maintain its divinity. And this is, as a side note, something that both Christians and Jews need to offer and assist our Muslim brothers and sisters because they have a very hard time reforming their text in that way. But I hope that answers that specific question.
Yeah, it's good. Making progress. There's lots of stuff I could ask specifically about like Jewish and Christian history, but not to make it like too broad. And also, I suspect there are many topics that other people have already covered. So I'll try to stay specific to the problems of like technology and what are some of your strategies to deal with it that are successful. Because I mean in the abstract it's funny because I think most people like perfectly agree that okay, you need to put technology in the service of something higher. So let's say God first, and then technology can be a means to help some things to God.
Well,
But
people agree.
I think, I mean, let's say within like Christians and Jews, probably most of them would agree. I think lots of secular people wouldn't, but I'm not too concerned about like those kinds of arguments right now. Um, it,
Like even challenge that, I guess that's part of the question,
yeah,
which is even a Christian, that there's level to that. What does that mean? It would be that while they're secular, quote unquote, secular Christians, will say like they believe in Jesus and like, but that's basically sort of where it ends to secular Jews within Israel. The majority of Israel is traditional. Okay.
yeah,
And so I would say even the traditional Jews, I would say in the operating system, their default system, if that's already built in. And I would argue that in the less devout Christian, right? I'm not challenging his relationship with God, obviously. I'm saying without liturgy and without practice, he doesn't have the necessarily the right tools, or not necessarily if he does see I'm doing this for a higher power. He might see I'm doing this for God, but I argue that, and this is part of the conversation, in Judaism, the fact that I have to have intentionality already from the second I put on which shoe, right? Which shoe and how I'm tying it, there's no escaping that matrix of it's always built around you. So that's what you're doing it for. So, and while that could exist in Christianity, and you'll correct me if I'm mistaken, but I believe like even in Eastern Orthodox liturgies, like you're there, you're participating, you're praying, but at some point it ends and sort of like they close the door and like you sort of move out, like that's over now. And in Judaism, like it never ends. There's always the conversation is sort of non-going. Um, Hope I'm expressing that enough again. I'm not challenging that Christians don't experience that all the time. I'm just saying the layman Christian, I believe his toolkit is not robust enough to actually have that intentionality.
yeah. I mean, I think it's plausible. It's sort of what I want to dig into more as well, because like at an abstract level, it's sort of easy to say, okay, we'll prioritize God, and then technology can be a means towards something. Um, Even I think in the secular realm, like plenty of people know that technology can mess them up or can do something good. But the question then is what kinds of systems or relationships can you set up so that let's say more people can more benefit positively from technology. And I think the intentionality point is interesting. I hadn't thought about it. It's certainly true that let's say in the abstract, I think what I've seen in many Christian groups is that you're supposed to offer up everything that you're doing, but it's maybe a little bit too broad to be generally applied. Like if it's just okay, like every single thing you do, you can try to offer it to God when you're doing it, and also when then let's say I go to mass, then I can offer up everything I've done that day, and then like on Sunday, then everything I've done for the week and so on. But maybe like one difference that I see you bringing up that is interesting is that if there are like already rules for things like throughout all of your day, then you're sort of practicing noticing that you should offer things up to God. And it's not just sort of left to your will to practice those things. So, like, I can force myself, let's say, to like, I can, and I know people do this kind of thing. Like in my schedule, for instance, my work schedule, I can like put like tiny meetings that just pop up and remind me to offer up like the hour of work I've been doing to God, and I can like practice things like okay, as soon as I wake up in the morning, I kiss the floor to offer it up to God. Like there's all of these little things, but it's not like widely used at all. Like all of this stuff is optional, I would say, within Christianity. Like it's not something that people try to apply across the board. So what happens is that like most people just don't do it. Like vast majority of people don't do this kind of thing, and then it does tend to create a kind of disconnect between okay, what you do within church and what you do outside of church. And what I'm hearing you say is one technique that you have in Judaism is that because you have all of these little things that like all rules that you should do throughout your day, then it's much easier to connect to liturgy and daily life.
So, first of all, thank you for re-articulating that. I agree with that. I agree with your articulation of what I said. And again, just as an example, right? My
Mhm.
son wakes up in the morning. his eyes open up, needs to make a prayer, needs to go wash his hands, make a prayer, needs to then go do actual prayer services. If he takes a drink, that's one blessing. If he eats an apple, that's a different blessing. If he eats a different snack, that's a different blessing. If he eats bread, he doesn't have to make all those blessings. So sometimes he's upset that he didn't do the right order, right? Because that would have locked down all the
Yeah,
other
yeah.
ones. So like that is each one is using a different word as well. Now, but let's take a step back for a second, right? Let's be biblical. Already in the garden, right? We're told in Genesis that God is taking, God is placing us in the garden, right, to work unto God, right? So we have these two concepts, and working is really developing, cultivating, building, discovering, creating, and guarding. Though together with that is restraint, is protecting, is sanctifying, right? So technology would belong to work it, right? But morality, Sabbath, law, family, those would all be part of guarding it, right?
Mhm.
So this has to be already from the get go, right? The master of the universe and his infinite wisdom has already given us, right, like the sequence of how those things are done. And there's another one of those, right? There's being fruitful and multiply, right? And also you want to subdue the earth, right? So you want two of these things. So both I'm trying to bring in family and children and continuity and generations already built into it. At the same time, I also need to subdue, which means I need to create development. I need a civilization. I'm going to need technology. So this is why I think Israel is unusual, like you're pointing out, because even though it's modern and it's advanced, ultimately the culture still carries like a deep idea that like children, right, are not just like a lifestyle choice. Children are part of the covenantal continuity of what we were promised and what we agreed to be to partake in, right? If the West today is thinking that imagines the future as technology, as like right, Claude came out with a new one, with a new one, with Judaism imagines the future generationally, right? Like and that's a completely different prism of how you're looking at the world, right? As Isaiah says, right, that I didn't create the world lo tohu bara leyotzrea. I didn't create it from emptiness. I formed the world to be inhabited. I'm sorry, I'm translating from Hebrew, but something like that in Isaiah 45. So there too, God is telling us that the world is not meant for just to be empty. It's meant for habitation. And if it's meant for habitation, that means agriculture, school, cities, economics, technology. Like there's no way sort of avoiding those things. Again, technology becomes problematic when it replaces life with, the artificial experience. And in Israel, you're a little protected from that as well, because our relationship with technology, forget exile. Obviously, exile mode is survival mode, right? But now when I come to this land, right, the technology I need to participate in is survival technology, water, agriculture, medicine, defense. Like all these things they're all super important, and they all have to be happening at all times. Like I think 80% of Jordan's water is being, is being given to them by Israel. Right. So aside from the fact that like that's a beautiful Ishmael and Isaac working together, there's an element which is like that's sort of a necessity. You don't have the luxury to be playing around with like, oh, well, we're going to make this or we're going to make that. The idea is like you need to make it's very, very connected to life. I have a population right now over here, and I need to see how I best allow them to get sort of, what they need. But to go on, but I want to stop for a second.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, you said many interesting things about the rules. Maybe the thing that's most striking from the outside is like it's surprising that like a large amount of people would I don't know if tolerate is the right word, but who would like really uphold these rules. Like I don't know if I try to imagine the like average Western person and like tell them that now they must follow like all of these rules. I can't imagine that more than a fraction of them would follow it. Even if you like I don't know, you told Christians that it's like it's something decreed from God or whatever. Like how is it do you think that like this works in Judaism that like many people can follow those rules?
First off, indoctrination, right? Like my son doesn't want to always go with me to prayer services. In fact, like last week, he's like, moaning and whining, like, I can't anymore, right? Like, so that's the reality, right? And which also makes sense. It doesn't really make sense to pray to God. And only when you mature can you actually understand like what's even happening over there. So obviously there's like, I'm indoctrinating my kid. We're all indoctrinating our kids. Would argue though, with this also touches a little about what we were talking about Yosef, which we could also get into later, which is like they also create a community, a neighbor, like I think he said, like a village within inside a city, right? You create like these little villages where you also can maintain, quote unquote, that level of indoctrination. We see it as divine providence, right? That Israel is so small because only in such a small state can you even model what that would look like. It would be too cumbersome to have the United States of America with 300 million people model such a thing. You actually have to have like smaller group that could people that identifies with the people. There, even though nationality is like a dirty word, like because of its size, it allows itself to define itself also that way, and that's believe that's the model it's supposed to be going to. So there's also the fact that it's small that allows for that to happen as well. However, kids today do 1,001 different rituals, from learning exact dances on TikTok to knowing the right phrases to knowing the which when yes to say 6-7, when not to say 6-7, like well, they build themselves their own ritual with the clothing, right? We could get deep into what the priest wears, or deep into the 17-minute video that some girl made about how to apply makeup with the exact rules and like make sure that you're using this one and not that one. So the question is, what are we doing that for? So do people have it in them? For sure, people have it in them. They're missing the step. It's ego, not realizing that the image that you are idolizing over here is the image of God ultimately, and you have to reorient that. But like I would say that the world is really, I'm very optimistic. I'm chronically optimistic. So I would say that the attacks, the protests in campuses in America against Israel, right? Which I have an issue with them. I love that energy though. Like disagree with what they're coming at, but if indeed there was a genocide, and indeed like things like that were happening, course you want the whole world to go up in arms. Is that not what we teach our kids? Like Greta Thunberg, I love that energy. That's like messianic energy. Of course, we have to fix the world. Like, what are you talking about? Now, like they need to be oriented just a little bit. Like there's an issue over there. But to see that it's what's in Judaism called the audacity of the generation. To see like that audacity is like holy audacity. It needs to be reoriented. So I think you have like a primed generation to do many different things. They just need to be put in proper orientation. But I don't see a lazy. I mean, there's obviously lazy tendencies in modern generations today, but like I think that there's a lot of willingness there.
Okay. Yeah, and then like how to get them interested in the right things. So you brought up indoctrination. Okay. I don't know if there's more we can say on that. I still find it like surprising that it works to an extent, but maybe I also just need to think more about the theology of like rules versus opening, because in Christianity there's sort of the opposite move of like okay, Christ fulfills the law, and then we still have some rules to follow, but it's not nearly as much. So I don't even have good, let's say, examples for like Christian communities that I've tried to. I mean, like monastic communities, maybe a little bit, but I don't have anything as widespread I can try to compare to.
What's the reward, right? Like, okay, so think about in Genesis, right? That God blessed the seventh day, right? And he sanctified it, and then he rested, right? From all the work that God created to do, right?
Mhm.
Which doesn't really make it, I felt behind him last night. Yeah, created to do, right? So we explain that, and I'll connect back to your question, right? It's not just simply that God wanted to, created a world and finished it, right? He's saying, I'm creating a world to do, meaning there's creation that was made,
Mhm.
tasks to still build in it, right? Um, and maybe this is the difference. Think of the classic story of Prometheus, right?
Mhm.
So, like, we don't have any fire, comes Prometheus and steals fire from the gods and gives it to us. In Judaism, the story is very different. In Judaism, Adam is bugging out because it's the end of the day and he thinks the world is coming to an end. And God tells him, Yo, Adam, take 2 stones, knock them together, you're going to create fire. And he does this. So fire is not stolen from heaven, and
Mhm.
and God is doing a co-creation dance over here. So when I'm teaching my son also these rules, The rules are because this is the dance, right? God says, "Be holy, for I am holy." He's saying, "I'm the only holy one in town. I don't want to dance with you. I can't dance with you if you're not holy. If you level up, we could dance. You could see the world differently." So, what all these rules, I'm telling my son, like, this operating system will allow you to look at the world and enjoy it at a different level. Not only because you are participating together with God, but you are creating together with God the world, right? Like we're in that seventh day, we're all working towards the eighth day, right? Which I guess Christians would say is Sunday. But like I'm saying, we're moving towards that day. And so I would say and it's not being said like this to my son all the time, but the narrative definitely is that this is the dance that we're doing together with God, right? It's not stolen, it's gifted to me. Another example in this is Adam naming the animals, right? There's a contrast different between this and in the Quran. In the Quran, it says that Allah gives Adam all the names, right? In Judaism and in Christianity, right? God takes a step back and says this crazy line, right? Let's see what Adam calls the animals, right? So that is an invitation to do this with me. Like you are clearly still need to be involved in this world and building it and participating in it. Now, what does that mean to participate, right? So we have the Mishkan, right? We have the tabernacle, right? So this is showing us that there's vessels that need to be created to maintain this holiness inside, right? That God says you're gonna make a sanctuary, and I'm gonna dwell amongst them. We could also talk about that being spiritually as well, of course, right? Everyone has to make their own little sanctuary inside them, but there's also something physical. Now, there is a great, and this touches home. There's a great line said about there's two people building the tabernacle, Bezalel from the tribe of Judah, the strongest tribe, and Eliav from the tribe of Dan, the weakest tribe, and they're building it together. And the Bible says that God filled Bezalel with the spirit of God, with wisdom, right? So what does this mean? The spirit of God is filling him, and we know he's not a prophet, right? We know he's not Big Mo. We know he's not Joshua. So what does this mean? And I think this is again like a major element in Jewish life, which is the spirit of Hashem, of God, is going to appear in craftsmanship, in design, in building. That means like an engineer or a doctor or a framer, all these people can all be part of a holy project, right? And as long as their tools are for a divine purpose. I would assume, I could be wrong, obviously some of that you're seeing in the beautiful Christian architecture, right? That you're seeing like inside, right? So beauty is one of those things. But again, like God filling Bezalel with that spirit is saying, I'm looking for these people right now or these individuals. Sorry for a second. Oz, yeah, go upstairs. Not now. So excuse me. So all right. So even the AI programmer, there's a crazy line, radical line by this Rabbi Cook, a rabbi that's very influential, a mystic as well, and very influential in the religious Zionist movement. And he talks about how even death ultimately is something that we're going to have to overcome, and the resurrection of the dead, where we could fulfill that prophecy potentially, even with our own technology. The question then will be, who is making it? Is it AI bros that are doing like microdosing, or is it the righteous person, right? Like, who's building this thing? But I'm not waiting. Like, oh, like, am I okay with the temple falling down from the sky? Sure, but I would immediately ask, but 1 second, how is the Wi-Fi getting connected? How is that? Is that happening? Or is it an invitation, right? Which is when you, Israel, / the world, are ready to level up, then build this amazing thing. Build this amazing thing using the right technology, using these amazing methods, right? We're going to have to build it without using metal work, metal tools that could, that take on impurity. I don't know. Maybe that's why we have CNC. Who knows why we're building this technology? So I to my son, back to those rules, the undergirding feeling is that we're doing this because our job is to rectify the world, and that is our mission over here. So all these rules, all these laws, right? Like ultimately, Neo needs to be able to see all that code to be able to bend the world. So we're being invited into slow rolling into that matrix constantly.
And does that kind of transmission work? I thought it was interesting when you mentioned scale and the fact that Israel isn't that large of a country, and that I mean, in general, Jews aren't that big of a group like anywhere. So do you think that like there's something providential there for transmission to work? Because one thing I hear often from Christians, let's say, trying to pass on the faith or even just like certain virtues to their children, it's really hard to do in a porous culture. Like unless your kids have kids that also, sorry, unless your kids have friends that also have the same kinds of beliefs, it's almost impossible to manage. Is that something that you see also on your side? Like all the rules, like even if you explain them well and so on, they're only really going to stick if your kids also have friends who at least like have parents who try to uphold the same kind of rules.
What a great question. So I moved last year to this new well, like it's like this little village in this nature reserve that I moved into. And it's a mixed, relatively diverse community, which is it goes from, let's say, on one extreme you'll have secular Jews, on the other extreme you'll have ultra Orthodox Jews, and a big gamut in the middle. So you have, let's say, an egalitarian prayer service, a European Jewish prayer service, a, uh, uh, a North African prayer service. And so my son is aware, right? Uh, term he's heard a lot where we previously lived and what I speak about in my house, which is you're a ben Torah, which means remember you're a son of Torah. Now he came home one day and said, like, I don't think all my friends are sons of Torah. Right. And that was like, yeah, I have to think about that right now. Now on the Sabbath, right? I wanted to hang out with his friends, do his fun stuff, things like that. His friends all play soccer on the grass. You can't play soccer on the grass because if you play on the grass, you're ripping out the grass, and that's a problem. There's a second thing, which is also you shouldn't be like sweating and like playing crazy sports on Sabbath. But I'm putting that aside. Now, if he would play with his friends like in my garden where there's astroturf, that's fine. But he knows he can't participate there. He also knows he can't get into the religious debate with them about that. That's it's not going to produce. Now they consider themselves God-fearing Jews. They pray in the morning. There's many things that they do. Now there's levels to that, obviously. Now my son asked, okay, like how much of this quote unquote matrix do I need to be taken on? Like, why can't I just do like level 6 like these kids are doing? Right. So the standard is for sure higher. And like my brother lives right next to me. His son, my nephew, is a year older than my son. He's in a school which is very similar to the school I studied in, which is very intense. I mean, he's in sixth grade, but like a lot of memorization, a lot of like intense Talmud study. One that requires you as a parent to be on. It's like suddenly he's going to drop, some random Aramaic text in front of me. I've read it years ago, but like you're as a parent, it's like you're constantly being asked to be like, and it's applied mathematics today. You're like didn't they just do this yesterday? Like we're doing it again today. So I personally didn't send my son to that school. Like I sent him to a school that's more relaxed, which requires more from me. It requires more from me to be like uh, doing more learning time, more study time with him. So on the other hand, I didn't love needing to memorize all this. I'm happy about it now. I didn't love it then. So that is. I'll take a step back where I'm saying that ultimately, though, while I'm participating in a very rigid uh, uh, framework with rules, I'm also aware that those rules have developed over the last 2,000 years of exile. And not only that, part of the reasons why those rules can't change so easily and there's ossification over there is because many complicated systems of this exoskeleton of exile that we carried with us. I am very aware, though, that once we come back to the land, there is going to be a change in that. There is going to be a new experience of what like what it is to be a Jew in your land, right? You have to remember there's 20% of the Israelites leave Egypt. The other 80, goodbye. Then Israel comes back from exile with almost no one, right? You're left with Judah, who happen to be from the tribe of Levite, like almost no one, right? So like, when we come back to a land, there's going to be like a revivification. There's going to be a new dance, right? As God says, like, I'm not going to pull you by the hand anymore. I'm going to pull you by the heart. So what does that look like? I'm very interested in and this also is true about Israel right now. There's been like an increase in 30% of religious observance in Israel, and many, many levels. I'm saying it's in the culture, it's in the music, and I'm very
Since
interested
when?
since October 7th.
Okay, okay.
So I'm talking about, let's say, superstars, like it's equivalent, but think of, let's say, like a Justin Bieber, so to speak, like in Israel. His concerts, like the language, all the lyrics of the words are all very, very biblical right now. And there's a lot of Israelis walking around right now that have the fringes that you see a lot of Jews with coming out, but no skull cap, no cover on their head. And it's like a new blend, which they're saying like that's not going to define me. So I know that I'm taking a risk with my son. However, I think for the people of Israel, it's important to be able to remove some of those walls. This is sort of very TLC. Like there has to be a joint conversation if we want to move someone somewhere forward. So like I don't see it as compromise if I believe there's real growth over there. That doesn't mean I'm not going to be like, and now Sabbath observance is no longer necessary. Like there's limits to that, obviously. But so to your question, yes, there's a risk I'm taking with my son. Having said that, built into our system, right? You have in Israel, it's Sabbath. That's the day off. The holidays are all connected to the Jewish holidays. The revival of the Hebrew language, all the names, right? So it's constantly around you, and it creates a big political problem for, let's say, people on the classical left, right? Because it's sort of if you don't see yourself as a Jew or a Hebrew, then you are a colonizer. Like either there's these land acknowledgments when they built Obama just inducted his the Obama Library. So there's all these land acknowledgments by the Chippewa tribe and this tribe and that tribe. So either tribes don't mean anything anymore, and we don't have to do any of the land acknowledgments, or tribes doing anything. And hi, I'm from the tribe of Levite, and I came back to my land, and I want my acknowledgement. Right, I'm here. So, but for Jews that are trying to be, cosmopolitan, right, they don't know sort of what to do with that. Um, but I would say again, the environment and the flavor in Israel is very, very, very religious as well. And this is also part of the problem, which I think again moves out politically a little, which is there's religious elements in play over here, but if you keep on talking about it as if like there's not, then like you're never going to be able to figure out exactly what you want to do over here.
Yeah. One like a few things stuck out to me after I spoke to Joseph.
Uh-huh.
And I've been mentioning them to people here and there because I find those things like fascinating, and I'm surprised I hadn't heard about some of them. One thing is the idea that couples marry young and then they are supported by the bride's family, either by living with them or like just like direct help in some other fashion. And Joseph was able to draw it like from Genesis, and I'd like to know more about like how this works in practice, and if like is it the thing in Israel too, or specifically, and like in history, Joseph mentioned that sometimes it was reversed. Speaking about it to some people thought, okay, like it's probably better that you go with the bride's family because often you have problems between like the bride and her mother-in-law. So going with the husband's family would probably not be a good move. So anyway, I'm curious to see how those things work in practice. And again, I'm surprised that like I had not heard about this before because it does seem drawn from Genesis. If you have other like biblical references or ideas like this, I'm super curious.
Well, mm, okay. So let's go back to Cain for a second. Our boy Cain. Okay. So Cain asks, right? Am I my brother's keeper? Right? Post murder. Post the accident. I'm trying to be fair to Cain, He slipped. So then he builds a city, right? He leaves, and that's what happens. Now, the problem, and I'll get to your question how this relates to the community in Israel as well. The problem with building a city is not the city itself, right? It's building a city after brotherhood failed, basically, right? So let's say, and you could correct me if I'm wrong, some Christians would see like Cain as like this archetype of like the fallen city builder, right? Like it didn't work out ultimately. But I would say your view is like a little more nuanced, which is um, he's not just like a villain that's doubling down on being villainous, right? You could see in his words was saying like is like his the sin is sort of too great to bear, right? He can't carry that weight, which is like it's sort of a plea. I'm asking from God, which is like can you really not carry this? Like is it really like you're saying like this is too much? And so God places a sign in Hebrew. It's ot. It's a letter, right? So people call it the mark of Cain, but could also be seen as like Cain. Even though you're getting pushed out, you still have one of the letters on you, and you are still part of the full ensemble. Like make your way back to fit inside the letters again. So it's it's you should see it more as protection in that way, right? It's giving him like it's mercy, and the city is not necessarily evil, right? It could be part of him repairing himself, right? I can't go back to Eden. That's done. Well, I have my flipping sword over here. My brother Abel is murdered, and I could build. That is a move I could do. I could educate. I could dedicate. I could create a structure for my descendants. Now, as we know, Cain descendants they build like metalwork and technology and music and culture and the things that our sages and your sages all discuss. Now, the Torah is not rejecting these things, right? Awesome that Tubal Cain did those things. It asks again, do these things answer Cain's question again, which is yes, I am my brother's keeper. As in, like those sons and the city he built were all to answer that question that he didn't know how to answer, which is that responsibility, right? So, and even Abel, right, which is he's he's let's say spiritually elevated, right? He can't build a civilization though, and because he's also dead. But we don't want an extreme, right? I would say like technology without brotherhood would be Cain, right? And you have technology without humility, which would be Babel, right? Because they want to make a name for themselves. And then you have technology under a covenant. That is possible redemption at that point. Now, how this connects back to what you were asking about the family, which is and how that works, we are building right into our system this this social synagogue, but a social cathedral. Okay, which is I I and maybe this is one of the deepest parts, like you were also talking with Yosef, which is like building a physical cathedral takes generations to build, right? And I won't necessarily even see it finished in my lifetime, right? Because there's a tremendous amount of things going on over there. So I would say religious communities work in a similar way, which there's 6 days, right, where I'm building a space. And there's homes and there's businesses and there's cities. But on Sabbath, which we could get into more later, which is like, again, I'm building something else. I'm building time and I'm building memory and I'm building family. So in the question is, are we still capable of marriage and worship and children? In the Orthodox Jewish life, it's not perfect, obviously, but we understand that we have to build this structure, right, that will allow us to maintain this relationship. And because of that, then there's a thing. I believe you spoke about this with Yosef with regards to the Sabbath, right? Which I need to have houses that are closest to the synagogue. And because of that, I'm going to have schools. And if I need schools, I need roads. And if I need roads, I need lights and all the things built about that. But it's all about making sure that you could keep this community and family together. So if one gets married, right, and I don't have a wedding dress, great. Go to so and so, and there's plenty of wedding dresses. Go, Israel, the country, comes and says, we will fund 2 successful IVF procedures for you. As in, you can do 5 of them and they don't work, which costs crazy money. Israel's saying, but we just want you to have kids. So we will continue doing this. And that's why there'll be daycare and there'll be all like, education is super cheap. Healthcare is super cheap. Everything else in this country, unfortunately, is more expensive. But those two elements, which are super important, are super, super cheap. And the attitude is we need to make sure that this relationship is protected. So while it's a little different in the secular communities, which get married later, right? If when I'm getting married at 24, right? The attitude is okay. Obviously, I want you to be able to be self-sustaining to some point, but and again, it varies between the communities, and that's why I think specifically my community is more interesting because the ultra Orthodox come and say the goal is just to learn, and like while we believe that like, everything Hezi just said about Babylon participating and work it and guard it, the ultra Orthodox don't see Israel, the state of Israel, as a theological element. And that's why there's a rejection of participating in a lot of that. It has to do with how they participate in the workforce and how they participate in the army as well. Having said that, so they're saying, okay, my daughter's going to get married right now. I need to make sure that they can learn as long as possible. Right now, the women are usually working because most men are studying. So for many, many, many years, the women are all working, which is its own problem because they were smart enough to transition to accounting and sort of low level coding, which has been a successful for them because it pays quite well. However, AI is going to sort of get rid of that level job, and then they're going to have to see what their model is. There's another model which is very, very, very wealthy ultra Orthodox Jews just keep on funding, generations, and they just take it very seriously. You just have to keep on funding the next generation, and the next generation open up more schools. There's also the ultra Orthodox are happy living at a very, very, very low standard of life. Multiple kids living in the same room, no AC, and very basic clothing. They're very okay with that. In my community, the move is it's science and Torah, Torah and work. These are things that we're understanding again from the Bible itself, which is what we're required to participate in. Right? There's the garments of skin, and there's the fig leaves. Right? There's the clothing that the priest wears. There's and there too. There's clothing for beautification, and then there's underneath clothing to make sure that they're staying clean. So it's also a question of what are we doing with are we wearing fig leaves or are we wearing these beautiful garments? So I would say in my community, while there's of course a focus on learning, a focus on having children, there's also a focus where like you must be participating in building, in rectifying. So from from being in the government to being in the Supreme Court and all levels of society, we need to be participating in. Well, again, I would argue that the ultra Orthodox would also do that if they thought, like I think, that this is like, we're in redemption times. They don't agree with that, or not all of them agree with that. So that's why they're required also, like, there's also less money to go around, and that's why there has to be more support there. So while it exists in the Zionist community, in the Zionist religious community, in the ultra Orthodox communities, it's more intense because of also due to necessity.
Yeah. All right. Okay. That that all makes sense. One aspect that again has to do with scale, and you mentioned religiosity increasing after October 7th. One thing I wonder at, like, especially historically, because I know there are tons of studies about the fact that for instance, when people go to funerals, afterwards they're more likely to have kids. Like if people face death and risk, like if they feel that their group is threatened, people are like community bonds are going to get stronger, and one of the ways in which that will manifest is having kids. Like how big of a part do you think that played historically for the Jews?
Fantastic question, right? Because we could ask like, okay, how much is it psychological and how much is this like actual, like, there's like an awakening over here. So I view that again, this is in the context of October 7th and what happened. So you have to think about it like the towns that were most brutally attacked on October 7th were the most secular the most left wing, as in all about peace, and I don't want to hear about religion. There was an awakening on their end, which is like, I guess I am a Jew. I guess that means something because these guys over here, like, they don't care about like the shrimp I eat or that I like. It doesn't matter to them. They see like, and this is why sounds strange. Like, I love. I don't know if you know this character, Nick Fuentes, problematic character. I love him. Like, he's almost there. He's gonna end up. You're gonna see. He's gonna end up. He's gonna be a fan. But like, he sees us for who we are in a certain sense. Like, I love that like unadulterated anti-Semitism. I see it as like a feature, not a bug. So like these secular Jews experience that. Not only did they experience that afterwards, they saw crazy galvanization of the people, which I mean, statistically, like you can be like, what was the biggest war? Let's say like I think like America sent like around 2.7% of its population to go fight. Ukraine has like something like 3.7%. Israel sent like 5.7% of their population to fight, and that doesn't include obviously all the women and all the things and all they're doing. So like there was also crazy 3 months of insane unity that everyone also witnessed. So not only did they see themselves from the outside being attacked as Jews, they then felt what that infrastructure of in Hebrew it's called chesed, but let's say graciousness, what that looks like on steroids. Across the country, which because they already have this system built in, suddenly like anyone who needs babysitters or teachers or and really it was horrible because the government failed. But the people immediately had this infrastructure, which is like a people to people infrastructure that was built up immediately at all levels. So people really got to experience that and definitely saw themselves as brothers. After that, there was at its height 400,000 right soldiers in Gaza. They all come back with reports that in each one of the houses is a picture of the Dome of the Rock, right? And that was sort of like a wake up call to a lot of Israelis, which also got controversial because like a lot of the soldiers put a patch on their hand of the temple, right? Like I have a pin that I wear like on Sabbath, like of the temple. There's a lot of sense of like, not only do these guys see this as Jews, they're so fully committed to do their story. And like it was a wake up call. Like 1 second, we have a story. Like we are a people. We like and an Asian person doesn't wake up in the morning. A Chinese person doesn't wake up in the morning and say like, "Do I have the right to exist?" We don't remember this, but as Jews, Abraham was given a choice. Right? God says, "I want you to do something, and I want to make a nation out of you." He could have said, "Yeah, not for me." We sort of have to every day remind ourselves and remake that choice. Abraham, that I still want this, right? That I'm still committed to what I told you at Sinai. Like you're committed to me, I'm committed to you. So that was a wake up call for a lot of people in Israel. Now, another reason why I think it's more authentic is because there wasn't a turn to now they all became observant or they all became Orthodox Jews. It's its own beautiful flavor, which I am super interested in because there's something again. I'm connecting this to the Greta Thunberg. Like as Orthodox individuals, I would say you as well, right? Like we have a tradition, and like it's a little hard for us to imagine something new because we would have to break our certain framing. Sometimes we require someone coming from the outside, right? Or I would say people needed a Jordan Peterson to sort of to hear things from and like how are all these people listening to his Genesis series, paying tons of money when my pastor is doing that for years and everyone's passing out, right? So like the fact that that could happen from the outside here too, I'm seeing this growth and this personal attachment to God, but not through, let's say, the literature, but something from the ground up. That is authentic Hebrew back in his lands remanifesting itself because there's 2,000 years of like I need to take off the Polish in me and the Russian in me and the thing in me. Like, who am I back in my land? Because for 2,000 years, I was just doing a dry run of what Judaism looks like, right? What does it mean to have a nation? And again, like if Jesus comes and says, does his split between Caesar to God, right? Judaism doesn't believe in that. We believe that like God needs to be mirrored through the king and through the prophet and through the judges. All of them need to be mirroring God, but participating alongside with him, right? And again, this goes back to the general idea of at some point, right? Like at the temple, right? Do people need to get into those roads? Who's making those roads? Like whoever's making those roads, he needs to get paid, and that payment needs to go into some sort of bank or crypto or whatever you want it to be. But it's not going to be like you get paid in mana and we shake your hands. It'll be like, I just worked on this for like 7 years. I need more than mana, right? Like I need like actual things to buy things. So to imagine that that can't be part of the infrastructure that we need to be dealing with, I think and again, this would be a difference between, I would say, let's say, general Christians, which there's a certain element which is this is a fallen world, and like there's a certain distancing from it. Like we don't see it that way. We see it like as actively participating in it, which which means of course I could fund my child so he could have a baby. Because again, I'm looking at things generationally. I need to make sure these these kids these kids are happening. There's a secular partner, a work associate of my brother's. Brother's 48 now, and he's a grandfather. And his partner, his associate came in and said, "Hey," he's like, "Look, you just had your grandson, and I'm the same age as you, and I just had my first son. That's why you won. Like you won the game because we completely played it differently. That doesn't mean my brother is not a powerhouse in his field, making mad money, working, doing it, Rolex on his hand, but he's still a grandfather. And like his mindset is, he always says, the 6 days are an ocean. The Sabbath is the island that I'm swimming to all week long. I'm swimming towards that goal, which I could then, and this is part of I would say, like the explanation sort of Sabbath, right? These 6 days that I am building, I'm creating, right? On the seventh day, I stop and I receive and I remember. And again, I go back to my family. And this is, it's you can't work hard. You can't do malacha on the Sabbath, which is, creative, constructive labor. You can work very hard on the Sabbath, as in you could prepare it's a Thanksgiving meal every week, right? That requires like a lot of work. So it doesn't mean like you can't sweat.
You
It
could
just
study
means that
also, I would guess.
can you study?
Yeah, like can you like I don't know, discuss Torah, that kind of thing?
Of course, you should be doing that all day, and you should be resting. As in, like, it's more than just resting. It's ideal to also have sex on the Sabbath. Like double down on everything. Like be fully you with fully her. Become one flesh on the Sabbath. Like that's the perfect time. Like you had an amazing meal, which you realize you sanctified all this food to God while listening to your son sing hymns, while then having time to study with him, to then resting, and then being with your wife. That is supposed to then give you the ammunition for the next week of creating, doing, building technology. But and what Sabbath is also, again, the tool we have for Sabbath, and why I feel like as the changing world is coming, we're potentially more suited to it, even though we also, even in our own traditions, we have to figure things out because I think there are going to be problems. Nevertheless, like we have a built-in system how to decompress from technology every single week. And not only are we decompressing from technology, you're focused on it's our sages also say that that any man that doesn't have land is not a man. It's like basically the original touch grass. Or it says that all craftsmen eventually will also work the land. With the sense of it must be embodied. And not having a Sabbath doesn't give the rat race time for embodiment, right? I have Sunday mass, we have a little meal, but then the TV's still on and the work continues. Like, when is there a moment to be in your brain palace, in the family brain palace? And if done properly, the individual, the family, the community, the city, the body politic. The body politic that could do that then has a message to tell the world. I would believe the world, and this is part of the hatred, is like Jews either are Judas or Jesus. Like either disappear or model, do it, model it. Like I'll be controversial over here, and I'm sorry. Okay. Okay. There's a very scary concept called the death toll in Gaza. And using Hamas's numbers, I'll say it's around 75,000 people. That's what they claim. Now, clearly, there's combatants inside. It's a handful of combatants. So you're talking about a ratio of, let's say, 1 to 1 or 1 to 2. Now, death is horrible. Hope, please God, there'll be peace and all the good things that you could put in front of the next thing I'm going to say. However, what the world witness is not a genocide, it's the most amazing accuracy level of technology used for, like, it's going to be celebrated. And it will 100% be taught in all schools of military because of how amazing it is. Now, the world can't handle that right now, but that's just one sense, which is like, this is what more moral war looks like. It means taking technology and being as precise as you can. So you could lower rates that are 7 to 1, 8 to 1, 15 to 1 to 2 to 1. Now, the fact that people say, like, no, it's still genocide, I'm putting that aside. But that is an example of taking a tool and trying, even in war, to make it the most moral, the most peaceful. Now, Sabbath is there to remind us, if technology advances and suddenly you have all this free time and you have all, like, what are you going to do with this time? You know what? It's actually, can I quote you something?
Yeah.
Okay, this would be Maimonides. These laws of kings. Okay, here it is. Let's translate this. Okay. This is how Maimonides describes the Messianic era. The sages and the prophets did not desire the days of the Messiah in order to rule over the whole world, nor to dominate the nations, nor to be exalted by the people, nor to eat and drink and rejoice, but in order to be free for the Torah and its wisdom. In that time, there will be neither famine nor war, neither jealousy, no competition, for goodness will flow in abundance, and all delicacies will be common as dust. The occupation of the entire world will be only to know God, as it says, for the earth shall be full of his knowledge, and the Lord as the waters cover the sea. Right? That is the goal. Now, greater Israel, the greater goal is that we have a built-in mechanism called Sabbath, which tells us how to decompress and what to do with time, morally speaking, how to use that time. When the Messianic era comes and technology allows there to be no more war, and I could give them water, and I have my universal basic income, now what? Right? The meaning crisis. What am I going to do right now? So the gift to the world is, let's now look at what we do with time. How do you use that time? So having having a system that allows you to constantly practice weekly what that looks like, to take a step back, not to exit control, but to sanctify that experience. That, I think, is extremely important for the years to come.
Yeah, maybe the thing that sticks out the most from our conversation for me is the abundance of rules. And sort of at the back of my mind, I don't know, this has been running and generating questions. I'll have to think more about the theology of rules and like when they get applied or renewed. Because very concretely, one thing I know that has happened in Catholic circles, especially the circles I know the most, is like I think we removed rules because I don't thinking that we had reached the ideal for enough people. I guess I'm not sure. Like the basic idea, of course, is that okay, because we think that Jesus was the Messiah and that we have arrived in some sense, so we can now have the law written in our hearts, and we don't need to follow all the commandments that Jews do. And like we still add a bunch of rules to follow that like the church would add from time to time. So I don't know, you have to go to mass on Sunday, and it's not a thing like in all churches, by the way. Like I have Orthodox friends who don't have to go. I think it's like once per 2 months or something for them. So rules can be different, and like the bishop can adjust them and so on. But it seems that the more in exile you are, the more you need rules as intermediates to remember your connection to God. And I think one of the things that happened to Christians and it's not just Catholic. I see it most obviously in Catholics because that's what I know most, but I know like this has happened in a lot of Western Christianity in the last few decades. It seems like people thought they had arrived somehow and that they could just have the law written on their hearts and we could remove the rules. And very concretely what happened is like if you remove, let's say, the need to go to confession before you take communion, you remove the need to go to, I mean, technically we should all still go to mass every Sunday, but like just by removing a few rules, what happened very quickly is it just vanished. So like you went from a place where people would go to confession, like the vast majority of people would go to confession at least once a year, and now it's almost like no one goes just because it's not like as required anymore.
I can't. You'll correct me if I'm wrong. There doesn't Paul send a letter to the people of Chorus? I'm forgetting the name right now, but basically he says something like, um, he seems like after he says like these commandments are no longer needed, right? There's basically like a party going on, and he's like, "Yo, guys, like, what's going on over here?" And they're like, "What? There's no rules." He's like, "Yeah, everything's like sort of allowed, but not everything's proper." I forgot the exact terminology that Paul uses over there. And right, there's a sense where like you open up. You said this, and this is very true off of our memory, right? Like, different from Silicon Valley in that, like, I would say Silicon Valley sort of represents disruption and mobility, right? And there's Israel at its best is really representing innovation with memory, right? Like it's 2,000 years of exile, and that's like why that I heard someone saying about, let's say, like there's a lot of it's an ancient culture, in China, and they all say that dragons exist. So he's like, well, isn't that the same like the story of Sinai? And the guy responding to him said, like, if you told me they had a tradition that they all need to remember that dragons exist and you must remember that and keep on talking about how you must remember that happened, then I would say, like, yeah, I guess there's something over there. Now, there's this memory that we're carrying nonstop saying, like, it happened, it happened, it happened, it happened. Don't forget that it happened. So, again, the innovation, again, even if you're secular, is built with that. So I would say Israel, modern Israel today, and let's say we'll talk about like the secret sauce, so to speak, that Israel has. So there's land, there's army, there's the language that we said, there's the agriculture, there's family, there's the Jewish calendar that we mentioned, there's the Sabbath, there's the national memory, right? I have my ancient text we all could read, which is sort of crazy, right? There's a public Jewish identity, and there's like there's survival responsibility as well, which is like Israel can't afford to lose wars because then they'll die. Now, in my specific camp, in the religious Zionist camp, there's also, I integrate on top of the list I just said right now, Torah and family, state building, and science. Like I integrate all those things on top of that as well. So it's land with Torah and army and science. And all these things are being like woven at the same time as well. So again, the rabbi that I'm very influenced by, Rabbi Kook, quite fascinating. Talks about again how like the when the material power of a nation increases, it also expands like this like a revival inside it. Now you could be like, well, that's true about America. Now America definitely had periods which it was a lot more Christian or a lot more religious, and they could have gone different places. And the Declaration of Independence to me is like a divine moment, and like America has done like tremendous amount of good, obviously in the world as well. But like again, material power is not automatically something that is anti-spiritual. Again, in the Jewish context, but like in exile, you have almost none of the vessels, right? I don't have public law. I don't have an economy. I don't have anything. So I'm participating as 2.5 tribes playing this little game. There's this great line when in the Bible when it says, when you come to the land and you see the nations around you have a king, right? You could give yourself a king. So our sages interpret this saying, what does it mean when you're seeing the nations around you? Because Israel is not in a vacuum, right? We're in relation to the other nations of the world, right? Which are called goyim, right? People think about it's a bad word. It just means nation. We're a goy as well. And the idea is that, okay, Israel, you're back right now, whenever that is, whether that's 1948, whether that was 1500, whenever that point happened, and you're ready to join the map of the world, you're going to have to see what else is happening around you. Maybe it's a monarchy. Maybe it's a democracy. It seems like the game being played in town is democracy. So that's what you're going to turn into. And the UN, the world looking at you and saying, like, yes, we recognize you, is you coming back to their land and saying, hey, I want to play the game. It gets more intensified right now because I would say in the last few years, Israel is now emerging in a certain sense as like a regional power. And like you're saying, there's a technological element over there, but now the pressure's on, which is like you had 70 years, 80 years to figure yourself out. And what I feel is that, like, the messianic era, energy is here. The vessels are very thin. I wrote this song, which is like, Messiah's here. He's just stuck in traffic. And the attitude is like, even if Messiah came to Israel today, first of all, he gets to the airport. He's like, I don't have $2,000 for a ticket. That's like nuts. Like I can't, like, he might not afford the plane ticket. Assuming he has money for the plane ticket, he comes into Israel, insane traffic. So there's just that awkward ride with the cab driver that he's just sitting in traffic. He makes it into the municipality and he wants to build a temple. The current state of Israel will be like, listen, it's 5 o'clock. I got to go right now. I don't know, Messiah, not Messiah. Like, you're going to have to talk about permits. And the attitude is that, like there's, and that's why you can't abandon technology. Like, there must be work done to allow for that to happen. Of course, spiritual as well, obviously, but we're playing in an arena, right? And again, specifically as a Jew that believes like in this Noahide covenant, I don't believe Christianity and Islam, Buddhism needs to disappear when the temple comes. Like, I believe there needs to be tweaks and clarifications, but the flavors of the world, right? God is a much bigger story than just like there's a beautiful, beautiful tapestry of who God is. So, like, obviously, your flavor and your relationship with God has something in it that I don't see or can't see. Now, I can argue different elements, but it has to be cohesive. And for it to be cohesive, we all have to be participating together. And like I said, there's an economy. All these things are still happening. When Messiah comes, it doesn't mean people don't get sick anymore, right? There needs to be a doctor. There's like those things still need to be built. So we can't abandon technology. We just have to constantly be putting on a hierarchy. It gets scary when you have today, like Dr. Sinclair started human trials on longevity medicine. I don't know if you read about this. There's been like a 75% success rate with monkeys and mice, where they took like a mouse and they took a baby mouse, turned it in 75 blind wrinkles, and then reversed it. Right. So, like, that sounds sounding to me like, what Rabbi Cook was talking about, that we could invent the resurrection of the dead. Right. But China and Russia don't care about that. Right. They're just clicking and making and doing and building. And like, so like, while the world is advancing every day, saying like AI is going to take over and still coding, while they're saying that, no one is even taking a Sabbath to be like, whoa. Like, 1 second. Like, do we even remember what it looks like to do this ourselves? Do we know what it is to be embodied? And this goes to your question, which is, there's some rules that people keep, but they don't keep it anymore. It has to be embodied. And I don't know if Christianity, with regards to, I mean, there's a reenchantment also that's going on in Christianity as well, but like that's sort of what has to happen. And rituals assist in embodiment, obviously. So, like, now your claim is, how can I take on new rituals right now? Right. So when I speak to a Noahide, I tell them there's like the laws that you are committed to God, and then there's something called proper conduct, right? Which I could start giving you advice. So as a Jew, I take on the commandments at the age of 13. Um, if I live in the Amazon right now and I'm helping my mom collect corn at the age of 7, right? I'm probably mature enough to take on responsibilities also at 13. If I live in New York and I like playing beer pong in college with my friends until I'm 25, maybe don't take on commitments until like you're like more relaxed. So you also have to see where the culture's at and where they are and how you're fitting to them. America right now is not, I don't know if it's selling Christianity to its American culture. Like, are you trying to map onto what your people need and what kind of rituals do they need and how they need to be connecting to God? So like, there's beautiful music in Christianity that I love also listening to, like, the swell and getting people together. But there's almost like you leave church and then it's over. Then you come back and then you have a little more of that, then it's over. And there's a sense of like, how am I taking church with me? How am I taking that relationship? How am I doing, like we said, build the tabernacle inside you? How am I doing that tabernacle, but constantly reminding myself that the tabernacle had multiple different rules and had multiple different things. If you also remember, Bezalel assembles Bezalel builds all the Lego parts. Then when it's time to assemble it, he goes to Moses and is like, listen, I might be like a prodigy and I took down like your abstract ideas and I put them into Lego blocks right now. You're the guy that said you needed this order. You assemble it. Like you need to assemble it. Moses assembles it and it fills with the glory of God. Like we have to be able to assemble our own infrastructure, like our own tabernacle to allow it to fill in. So I'm okay with the Christian tabernacle being different than the Jewish tabernacle because that would totally make sense that they have different jobs that they need to take on. But using this idea, if you want to manifest as rectified Esau, and that's like in my prism, if you want to recognize, like, I want to take that blessing back of the hands of Esau. So yeah, so like it's not enough for America for you to have, billions and trillions of dollars. It's where are you morally? What is it that you want? How are you pushing all these things forward? So and you can see there's fragmentation with identity throughout Europe, throughout many different countries, who we are, what like England, is it good to have a queen? Is it not good to have a queen? Like these are all questions that are coming up again. But all these things are space holders for God. So like we, and this is the Jewish claim, forget any intermediary. Talk to the main dude directly. No rocks, no stones, no prophets, nothing, like the main dude. Um, and I think like that again, that is what's specifically, the Israeli model is because of the memory, because of the scale, because of the because even though it's secular, people like to say that it's secular. Again, 70 to 80% are traditional. And when I say traditional, that means like I am more observant today than most Jews were throughout all of history. And the standard is so high now. It's like people think sometimes like, the ultra Orthodox Jew, that's sort of like what like Abraham looked like. Like, no, like the Jews in the first temple, their relationship was completely different. First of all, divinity was around, God was present, right? I'm not asking myself, like, what does God mean? Like, it's clear, it's there, He's here. The rules, I go 3 times a year, I go to the temple. I'm not having all these 100 different rules that Chazi is talking about right now. I had to build those rules because he's not present anymore. Like you just said, I have to build this memory. I have to build this avatar that with all these different things together, it creates some sort of tabernacle where I could say like, okay, this is a vessel that feels right where I could have him in. And then I'm walking with that. I'm totally okay if in the future there's less of those requirements or there's more of those requirements. I just want to do his bidding ultimately. But I definitely think that the Christian world, there's a technical level to this, which is you could just say copy paste, right? You have a good model. I want to adapt that model. I'll say from a theological point, though, which is more interesting to me, it's I would say Christianity, I would argue, needs to go back to Rabbi Yeshua, Jesus, and see how is he participating because he is keeping those rules, right? He is living that embodied life. He is like you could bet him coming to Israel today, if JC comes, he's going to feel very comfortable in my community. And a lot of it's going to seem very, very relevant to what he was doing. And you'd be like, that makes sense, and this makes sense, and I didn't came to change any letter. Now, what like if you told me I didn't came to change any letter, Hezi, I don't do any of the commandments you're doing, but I'm participating in it fully some other way. So then I'll be like, okay, how is that happening? If it's just belief, then I would say it's a problem because God tells Cain, right? Evil's waiting at the doorstep. You're gonna control it. Okay, what are my tools for controlling it? Unless the claim is, from the first coming, now there's no more issue with evil, but we know there's still an issue with evil, and we know we still have to contend with it and things like that. So God says, choose life. I'm giving you different tools. I'm building different things that you could participate in over here right now. Pick those things. Choose life means choose the methods that I gave you to participate in all these activities, which includes, yeah, the rabbis of your generation, or the church fathers of your generation, right? Assuming they're being true and assuming they're using the traditional tools of how to interpret the text, then it could be that here we need to bring it down. Here we need to bring it back up. We know that the prophets were allowed to do, it's called like a momentary ruling, which negates the scripture. The prophets had the authority to do that because they're saying, okay, like I see Samuel's a great example of that, right? He doesn't bring the ark back to Shiloh. I mean, back to the temple. He keeps it with him. He doesn't go to the priests. He knows there's corrupt. He's walking around all of Israel judging for people. So he's flattening the hierarchy. We even say, like, he's a descendant of Korach, right? That had that argument with Moses back in the day again. So there are times when, yeah, it needs to be flat. There needs to be changes going on. So we get very scared of that. And like, I guess the Protestants, you would be like, they're protesting, so to speak. I would argue as long as that protest is happening for the right reasons and always being judged, right? It could be that this generation needs more strict rules and other generations need less strict rules. And this is also why prophecies could be ongoing and they could be changing, right? There's styles to different prophecy. Think about it sort of like string theory. There's multiple routes, right? Like it could have been that we would have been saved X, and it could be that we needed, this route right now to emerge where we are today. But cannot see it being separate than the Christian story.
Yeah, one thing I like, I guess one thing that I'm wondering how Christians could integrate is the importance of theology. Like I don't know what's the word, but the years of schooling that you do before you take like on a secular job, just to study the law. I know some groups, some Christian communities who do this, but typically it's more for the consecrated celibates, like people who make vows of celibacy. They might like go and study like 6-7 years of theology before they settle into like a secular career, and then like within themselves they're able to have this balance between, okay, like I know all the theology, I can adjust, let's say, the rules and like connect like my technological life with God, and it's working fine. And then those people will go and model it to married people, for instance. Um, that's one thing that I have friends who have done this kind of schooling and who are celibates, and then I get help from them. But I haven't seen, and it makes me interested. I haven't seen like on any large kind of scale married people who go and do this amount of years of schooling, let's say, and then sorry, this amount of years of schooling, I mean like in theology or philosophy, and then move on to a secular career. I know individual instances, like even myself, I did actually sort of did it in the opposite order, but I did my undergrad in math and computer science, and then I did grad school in philosophy, and I kept doing philosophy and theology on the side for several years, putting sort of my tech career as a sort of almost a part-time job, like still 40 hours, but overall, like I spent a lot of time doing just philosophy and theology for several years, and then now I feel like I can have both like ends of the spectrum in my life, and it's fine. But I'm wondering like how, and I don't know if this can scale like community wide without the like intergenerational family support that you mentioned earlier.
Right. What supported you?
Sorry, what? Sorry.
You went to undergrad, then
Yeah.
you did, then you moved into philosophy. So like, how are you filling your fridge at that time? Are you working at that time?
Yeah, I mean, first, I mean, in Quebec, especially, grad school is very cheap. So
Mm.
I actually lived with my parents still during grad school. I and then I was working in the tech industry part time and then full time when I wrapped up my master's. And then when I wrapped up my master's, that's when I started getting involved with Jonathan and John Vervaeke. And then like I just had my full blown tech job and got married through those years. So supporting myself through tech and the fact that education was very cheap. And until I got married, I lived with my parents.
So I guess the focus then is okay. Like okay, this goes back to why am I studying, right? So if it's to like we said, but my mind says because metaphysics and physics all bring me into the closer courtyard, into understanding God,
Yeah.
right? So that's why it's all for that purpose. So the support from the community is like obviously he needs more time so he could understand the mastery of the universe, which only then he could apply into law, into architecture, into design. Right. So like when I'm building someone's house right now, there's all the technical elements that are true, but I'm building it for an experience, which is like while we're going through the house, I'm like, okay, describe to me your Sabbath meal. I want to know how it plays out. Am I listening to, is it a 3 hour conversation? Can I go lounge in the couch in the meantime and talk to you? Like how are we building this holy space for you? How do these rooms work? Like every room is built in with like, okay, the kids are gonna come home, and then the room has to at least be able to accommodate a married couple and a little baby crib in each room. So there's a whole intentionality to aside from yeah, we'll also get you beautiful tiles and we can get you like a Gucci chair. Very nice. The point is though, we're building all this for this reason. And the design and the elements, if I'm focusing on the light and I'm doing all these different things, it's because and I tell them this while we're going through this. Sometimes it's also sort of educating them, which is we're not buying the Sub-Zero fridge that costs 30 grand because you want to flex, right? We're buying it because you know the level of this fridge is the best to keep the food super fresh. So your Sabbath meals with the kids is going to be great. And that's how we're spending that money. And like I want you to be intentional with that, Mr. Cohen or Mr. What's because like you didn't like, a lot of my clients are living abroad, they buy a house over here, right? Which is like, a vacation house. I'm telling them like what's happening abroad is the vacation. This is the reality. You're building it in the land for your house. Like this is the house that you're looking at and you're building and you're going to be with your kids and you're looking at the land. So like the intentionality going into it needs to be very, very different. Now, if you're going to have a son, daughter, or maybe you have kids, maybe please God, I hope they're all healthy. Okay. So now what is the goal for him, right? Is the goal for him to best understand God, which of course can happen through science, through this or this or this, or is it get a great job, get a good career? Like those are secondary. So like it's all about like God, and that's why I found my wife, and that's why I did my career. So if that's the goal, there has to be this built-in system which allows me to cultivate what that concept looks like. Right? Like how who am I talking to? What am I learning about? So in these schools, which again, like half the day is secular studies, and half the day is so obviously there's Bible and there's Talmud, right? So you're learning about the different opinions and you're still seeing the minority opinion still there. And you're weaving in philosophy, right? Like the Talmud talks about this rabbi meeting Cleopatra. He didn't actually meet Cleopatra. He's talking about the Egyptian philosophy that's there at the time, and they're contending with those ideas. And then you go to different. There's this concept called meta modernity, and in this concept, there's this idea of toggling. I very much believe in, which is I have a Maimonides operating system, and I have a Rabbi Kook operating system, and multiple different rabbis. Or let's say you could say that I have like a Saint Seraphim, and I have Tertullian, and I have different modes. And based on, and they're all the words of the living God. So if I'm confronted right now with a situation that it could be through Maimonides, it's difficult for me to answer. I just toggle to another operating system that allows me to do that. But the only way I could toggle is if I've filled my utility belt with those operating systems. So like, and then if someone hits me with like, well, do you know that like really the redactor wrote the Bible? I'm like, I have that toggle I could be in, and then I'm not worried for that conversation of how I want to answer that question and talk about what the Big Bang and how that affects those things. And you could hop now if I only have one theology, if I have Sunday school answers, right? My relationship could be crushed immediately. And sometimes because I know subconsciously that it's on wonky ground, not because the claims are not true, just because I've only had some of the claims, that automatically makes me want to push the borders a little less and dig in a little less because I don't want to deconstruct myself, which is something that we've been seeing going on right now, like, this full deconstruction. And most people are not John Vervaeke, who could secularize this beautiful system to himself, where, like, he's clearly still a holy person and it's all good, and he managed to do it. Most humans need a system. And by the way, while he's not religious, right? The guy's learning all day and being embodied all day and doing practices all day. So, like, he had to literally create his whole new system, which I would argue, and you as a Christian would argue, clearly is based on religious ideas, and that, like, that he's working out of. So like, okay, you want to call it the 5 Ps? No problem. They'll call it the 5 Ps.
Yeah, I think there's sort of two aspects to get this working, and I'm especially curious about the second one. So one is from the side of, let's say, the parents supporting their kids to study theology before they then move on to study, let's say, something more secular. I could imagine this working like without too much difficulty. I think even if you're just like, if you're old enough to be patient, I guess it's also obvious that it's going to pay off, like, by all metrics. Even just like for a secular career, if you've already like had philosophy and theology in your background and you have like a broad understanding of how humans work and how the world works, then by the time you go and you study something more specific, like computer science in my case, then you'll be able to make better decisions. And of course, like, you'll, let's say, start like a few years behind people who have like been doing it like 7 years earlier, let's say, if they didn't have to go through grad school. But still, like, after several years, I would expect that having studied philosophy and theology is going to pay off and it's going to be better. So I wouldn't have too hard of a time imagining parents supporting their kids doing that. I wonder how it is that let's say young Jews are interested in all that studying, though. I'm not, because like, from, I don't know, if I imagine like around me, I'm not sure that like that many 20-year-olds would sign up to go study theology for that long. I understand that you can indoctrinate kids and sort of force them to do stuff when they're young, but by the time someone is 20 years old, like, they like, if they don't want to do something, they'll probably be able to find a way to not do it.
What's that relationship with the world? So, well, yes, it's called indoctrination, but the way it plays out, it's not me with a ruler being do this and do that, right? It's walking in the forest, like, hey, again, connected to the land. This is where David fought Goliath. The thing we read yesterday, literally in my backyard. I'm walking there, and I'm like, this is where it happened, right? So, like, hey, there's, like we said, there's a sense of memory, which is like, you are back in your land. Like, you're that tribe that made it, which is just like a crazy story. That's number one. So that immediately throws you back into this sort of time capsule, and you see your history very embodied. Then it's not that at that age he wants to study theology. It's the concepts and the wording he's hearing all the time are already integrating that way of thinking about the world. Coming from the evil itself, from God, right? That Satan is not, there is no Lucifer that was rejecting God. There's all happens from him, right? The reason we cover our eyes when we say "Hear, O Israel," that famous line, is because we're saying, I don't know if you heard Paul Vanderklay use this term, God number one and God number two, right? There's
Yeah,
the
yeah.
Arenic and the Agentic, right? So when we say the Shema, we're saying God number one is God number two. However, I close my eyes because I need a cognitive dissonance there, because at a young age, I'm saying the God that knows me is also the God that gave my sister cancer. They're both the same, like nature, and they're both the same. So 3 times a day you're saying that. So again, subconsciously nothing, but like already built in are huge questions. Like, what does that even mean? That like God is also the creator of evil, right? As like Isaiah says. And even in our liturgy, we change that. We say God creates all, like, good and creates all things, because the rabbis realize, like, it's a lot having to ask people every day to say that all the time. But anyone knows his Bible knows that where that verse, what the core of that verse is. So like the things you're studying. Okay, there's a famous story that kids are hearing. the great Rabbi Akiva and his three friends are walking post-destruction of the temple, and they're looking from a view, they're looking at the Temple Mount, and it's, destroyed, and they see foxes walking there. And the two rabbis start crying. They're like, look how horrible this is, like this unholy animal in the Holy of Holies. And they look at Rabbi Akiva, and he's cracking up. And they're like, how are you cracking up? He says, just like we knew the prophecy of destruction would be true, so too will the prophecy of redemption be true. Like, this just lets me feel like, good, phase one happened, so I know there's going to be phase two. Now, again, that is heavy to give a kid to think about, right? Like, these things are all for the good and they're all for the best. And that's the blessing we make on, when someone dies, we say, this also exists again, when you're at a funeral, like you said, like there's this moment. But if my wife hears right now on the phone that someone passed away, the first thing that's going to come out of her mouth is blessed he, the judge of truth. Like immediately, which is like, oh no, it's horrible. I mean, like first, of course, divine and what was supposed to happen. So those little conversations are constantly sort of like flowing around. Now, when my son asks me about the terrorist that's like 30 minutes away, right? I'm speaking to you now from within my bomb shelter, right? So we spent a lot of time the last few years. I have to then unpack how we see the other religions of the world, how we see other nations. What does that mean? How does Ishmael work? And like those are live things that are always happening. There's different ways how to learn that. A, hitting it head on, like if like the reality, my son's asking me right now about a terrorist, all the way to the stories of, again, when you're studying the Bible, often you get to the story of Balaam and his donkey. And then you have to ask yourself, 1 second, this story has no Israelites inside it, and Moses is not involved in it. It's just this king talking to some other prophet. But then my son is aware, intuitively, while there's the narrative for the Jews, there's many other channels happening in the world, right? In my theology, I have, right, Jesus could have resurrected from the dead. Jesus could have done miracles. That doesn't negate any of my theological beliefs. So like when my son says like, is it possible that he did miracles? Sure. But to answer that so lightly, you need to have a lot of tools to be like, wait, so does that mean I should believe in him? I'm like, no, I have many answers, why X and Y, Z, which already start with the God that wants you to tithe and the God that wants you to, right? So like the side locks, the sideburns on the side of my head, right? But to remember, it also relates to the field, leaving the corners of the field uncut for the poor people. For the poor people, right? So my son knows that when we go to the barber and we have a certain haircut that doesn't look all haircuts, is because you always must remember the week. And that's why when he comes home, I always ask him, "Did you see anyone in school today crying? Did you see anyone having a hard time?" And the reminder is this. This is supposed to come through. So again, from the dress and the songs and the participation, and it becomes so much easier when it's in the country and the land. I would argue that in America or Europe, when it was much more Christian, right? Then you would obviously had a lot more of that community was there. People going to church was a lot more that made a lot more sense and all those things. I think again, Jonathan Vervinke has his move. Paul Vanderklay is I'm trying to do these estuaries, right, where people are talking and they can see each other. So these are all good. These are all good moves, and it could be that it would be a shame not to use the Christian tradition to give yourself new rituals because you already have such a beautiful, rich history of that. But in theory, like John Vervinke is doing, you could build new tools if you wanted to. But I think, like, again, teaching a young kid, like, think, okay, this is a good question, Isaac, because I'm just thinking about right now. I have what I call the Sabbath books. So, like, when my sons come with me to synagogue, definitely when they were younger, I said, like, okay, I know we're going to be in synagogue now for, let's say, an hour and a half. It's a long prayer service. I don't want them hanging out with their friends just like outside. So you could bring certain books and you could just read these books in synagogue. One of them is about the tribes of Israel, different cool stuff. Okay. Now imagine there is give me a saint that's been super influential on you, or a Christian thinker that you love.
Augustine.
Okay, Augustine. Think of what it would look like to have the Tales of Augustine in a comic, or think of what Jonathan Peugeot is doing with War Dog. Kid will read that, and a kid will then build in those things. Now, part of us think like giving him Augustine, like I can only do that like much later on. Like, no, you don't. You could create an Augustine story. You create all different things. So I have a book called Tanya for Kids, and it's all about like the divine soul and the beastly soul and them fighting. And it's a kid that walks around, and next to him is always like this little bull, and it's sort of this dynamic that he has to deal with. So like, and then at the end of every chapter, there's like a blurb from the actual text of like this text that he can read through. Now my son has been reading it over the years, many, many, many years. Now I didn't have to touch that. I just know that in 4 years from now, or 5 years from now, when he gets into the real version of that, all of that groundwork was already laid down. And you could even reject that, but it's going to be too late for you because it's you already have that in your toolkit. So like, I don't know if I don't know if books like that exist. But like when I think of War Dog, I look at that as an example. Like that's like a hack of you could do that, right? They came out with this new fantastic animation movie called David, which was amazing. Now that was all done with like AI, and now with a big studio. So kudos to the Christian brothers and sisters that did that. Like, good, great shows, great. Like, do all those things. Like my sons all watch these Christian cartoons. I need to like monitor a little, right? When your boy Jesus gets involved, I have to see like where I'm explaining them. But these are things that they're constantly sort of participating in. So I don't have any screen time. There's only screen time once a week, which is on Friday before the Sabbath. They could watch. The rest of the time, there needs to be like there needs to be participation again that's aimed for like it doesn't mean that like he's playing basketball with his friends. And I see like you have to do it for God, and at the same time you should be like running like with like you're allowed to have like a good time. But the way you play is in a godly way. And if he falls down, that's how you have to be participating in this whole activity in a way, like I said, like the way a son of Torah would participate. What's the standard for the son of Torah? So I have a standard of lit, like I have a very robust standard in the Christian world, right? Like, what is the standard of being a good Christian? And again, different denominations, but then there's like, okay, so like, what are the responsibilities I need to give my son? And even if there's like six responsibilities, okay, like is he only going to be aware of them when he's like 18 or 19, or can I make him aware of those things earlier on through quote unquote subliminal messages? And that's going back into the indoctrination because there's no way avoiding it, right? Like that's the game we're in. Um, there's something that makes me feel more comfortable about the indoctrination is because built into the theology is, hey, ask any question and challenge, right? Wrestle with God. So like if my son says like, okay, but I don't think anyone's listening to me when I talk to him, right? I'm like, oh, that's a big question, Bill. My son's name's Bill. I'm like, that's a big question. But like, what? It's not like, oh no, what are we gonna do? Like, I'm like, great, like, fantastic. We'll play around with that question right now. Like, it's all that's a game that needs to be like figured out. It would That's how I see it. Like I'm saying, music, movies, book. That's how it needs to come in now. But you don't want your sad pastor's comic, right? The illustration needs to look fantastic. The storyline needs to be fantastic. And like those, there's these new books that came out of like Jonah. It's amazing. Like it's used to be this artist for DC. He became like he converted to Judaism, and now he makes like he did the book of Esther, he did the book of Jonah, and it's like next level, and it's amazing. And like the way it's the kid also sees these images is like is mind-boggling because as a child when we were reading it, like you didn't have those images, right? But now you see the colors, and you could weave in the midrash of also what it means to that, and then like I have a book of the tribes, like I was saying for the 12 tribes. My son sees, hey, who are all the special people in the Bible from that tribe? Stories of them, the sources of those stories, images. How did their flag look? What was that flag color? And I'm not nervous to be like, okay, this has Egyptian origins, but that totally makes sense because we were in Egypt. So like that's why like those things happen. So again, like my son just reading that again and again, even if he's like a little bored from reading that, I believe that that like builds a tremendous infrastructure.
Yeah, and then he's gonna be interested enough when he's older that he'll be happy to go and study for several years. Um,
Even if he doesn't. So like my
Mhm.
brother, secular, okay? Tattoos all over his body. Nevertheless, anytime he gets his letter of accommodation or recommendation when he's working for people, it's always he's a man of truth and a man of justice. And he taught us about God. And I went to my mom, who like for years was like devastated because my brother was no longer religious, right? So like he doesn't observe the Sabbath. So it broke my mom's heart. And I told my mom, I'm like, look at the wording over here. You won. You did it. You made a child that like the people that see him see truth. One of God's names. See honor. He is not religious, and they are impressed by God by seeing him. So should he be observant of Sabbath? Yeah, great. But that like definitely don't look at it as a law. Look at it as a huge win. And my brother knows this about himself, that he is in Israel. There's a thing called a datlash, which is an acronym which means formerly religious or formerly Orthodox. So the formerly Orthodox people are this complete different blend of secular people because they're secular, but they have already a built-in infrastructure of how they look at the world. So like they eat shrimp, but they eat it like in an orthodox way of how they go about it, and you should like make sure you're doing it the right way. Like so, my brother knows that his operating system is still very much Jewish, while he tweaked it and he's more secular. But like he's very happy that he has that infrastructure. And recently, we're discussing his sons right now. Also, one of them is becoming bar mitzvah. So, like, does he wear the phylactery? So again, he lives in a secular home. He's now trying to figure out what that looks like because he knows that he made it, right? He could play that secular game because he had enough infrastructure. His sons don't have that infrastructure. And that's like he is aware of that problem right now where he's saying, like, I'm not sure what I'm going to do with that right now. Cause like what our families are all together very often. So his kids say, like, okay, my uncle Chazi's kids look just like me. They play the same games I play. They watch the movies I watch, but they have these fringes and they stop 3 times a day to do this praying and they do these other things. But like, do I need to do that? And like my friends in school don't do that. Now my brother's anxious about that. Like he loves his family time with us because he wants that sort of to rub off on him. He also knows that he sort of can't like I can't now go back necessarily and do these rules because I put him in like this random bubble, secular bubble that he's in. So yeah, so that's a risk. That is a risk my brother is taking. He is hoping that between him and the state of Israel that he lives in, right? He's like, I'm gonna lean on the fact that he speaks Hebrew, called Israel, all those things. Plus, my background will still give me like a good enough experience for my son. And I would argue that that's probably true as far as like creating this like even keel person. There's someone else on the TLC called Gilad, secular Jew. He's a physicist. But when he finished school, he went to something called a secular seminary. So learning a lot of the same text from like a secular perspective, and he really enjoyed that because like so again, even that is while they're living a secular life, that's still like again, and he would consider himself an atheist. He loves that year where he sat down and participated in studying, doing these things. And I would argue, even though he's completely secular, and he would proclaim an atheist, nevertheless, culturally, he's very much interested in that operating system because, like, I want to see the world through that because I could see all the good it done and all the success it had, which goes back full circle to like, okay, and it seems like they still want to have babies while wrapping up, you know, technology. And it seems like if we're going to the next level with AI, where like I'm talking about it switching people or giving me free time, so then I really got to start worrying because like experiment, first contact 2007 with social media was a bust, right? Horrible anxiety, girls committing suicide. So round two, which is much more dangerous. Does everyone want like to gamble again, or do people want to say like, no, 1 second? It seems like there's a people over here that still have a focus on a meaning, which allows them to still, like we said, like this generational understanding. They see themselves in history. If I'm a random a citizen of the world, nothing's anchoring me, right? If I'm a Christian, I have a story, right? I want a temple built. I want Jesus. I want the last Mahadi to come back. I want Brahma to show himself. Like either way, I want the real. So like I it would be risky for me to like you would have to ask yourself, okay, but does my liturgy or does my religion have tools to deal with, for example, okay, now I could live till I'm 200 years old and in a 30-year-old body. Till death do us part. Still, do we know what it's like to be married for 200 years? I don't like. I could commit for 70, right? What do I? Am I a child till 40? Because then there's still another 160 years of quote unquote being an adult. Now, religions make sense as long as humans remain the same. If the human experience changes completely, right? The Torah was given to humans that bleed, that cry, that are jealous. If I have an app or if I have a chip in my head that allows me to read your mind, that is a completely different experience. And then you have to ask yourself, okay, even if, and I would say, even if the Torah doesn't have, we believe it's divine, so it does. But if it's not obvious to me what the answer to deal with new technology, right? Or like I want to go at least back to a tradition that knows how to constantly be challenging itself and has a tradition as a child already, a Talmudic tradition of arguing for heaven's sake while making a decision and saying we're going to go left, but we realize what the minority position is, and I'm keeping it there because it could be in the future I need to tap in to that minority position, and I'm allowed to do that because he was still part of the game. And I decided against him because of now, but now, so I need a tradition that allows me to do that. If I don't have an infrastructure for that, then I'm going to be hit with AI with, okay, what is my relationship to like, should we just clone all our body parts? Because then I could go skydiving whenever I want and I just embody new place. Like, is that how we should be looking at life? Is that the right way to be looking at life? If I could like digitize my consciousness and go hang out on the moon, is that, did I be doing that? Like, what am I doing with my time? So with an what I believe, like a crazy moving reality in front of us, like the Abrahamic religions, but really all religions need to ask themselves, like, do they have the toolkit to deal with this new emerging world? Your article is pointing out saying, hey, we're disappearing and we're advancing. What's happening? And here are the people that still remain, they still want to be in the game. Right? We know now that in China, like they have full cities, ghost cities that are completely empty, that they can't fill up, right? But I can tell you that in Israel, post October 7th, the energy here is cranes everywhere you see and pregnant women. All about life, all about building. Not like, yes, it's sad, yes, it's bad, but like as we say, we have a saying that says, the eternal people do not fear a long road. Now, we can feel who the eternal people are. Islam might want to be the eternal people, Christianity, but like I would say the rest of the citizens of the world, they're living in a nihilist bubble. They're not the eternal people. So like you will disappear because if you don't have the mindset of like, no, I'm here for the long run. And by me being here means my son or his son or his son, because of that memory and because we're connected. So that's a push, right? So my son, like he asked me, like, do you think we'll get to see the Messiah? Right. I feel confident that in our lifetime we'll get to see him. But the attitude is like, we've been waiting all this time and we're going to keep on waiting. And I could show you all these good things that are happening. And again, I believe the Christian world has a great story to tell as well. Like, look how you guys uplifted the whole world. I mean, like, it's crazy, obviously. Like, that's why I feel like, every tongue shall swear and every knee shall bend. We're very close to the point. If you far as I'm concerned, because the Buddhists and the Muslims and the Christians all ultimately believe in the main source of power. Everyone's already in the top. So I would say the next phase is really when we start playing with Babel again, building this tower and making ourselves our name, right? Making, you know, not only are we making this new brick, but we're doing it for the purpose of glorifying our name. So then you really got to start being worried. And, the Midrash says that Abraham was one of the builders of the tower. And then he goes off and does this thing and realizes that didn't work out. Your article is pointing out saying, hey, you guys are building a tower and it doesn't look like it's going very well. So it makes sense for these conversations to happen because like we are the people in the trenches saying, okay, what are we building over here? Either we need to abandon that project and go build something else, or we need to participate in building it, but make sure that we have the right tools and make sure, like it talks about Zephaniah, if in Babel it's all the same speech, trying to unify everything, in Zephaniah it's coming back in one accord and in pure speech. I need you to understand me, but you have your tools and your language and your jargon. It's relevant for a Christian and that world. And we have to recognize how we need each other and we need to be building on that. So you and saying, hey, Heavy, can you answer me this? I look at it being like, how else are brothers supposed to behave? How is that? Am I not being my brother's keeper by sharing that information? Right? Like, and it has to be that way because nobody wins unless everybody wins. Like that doesn't mean God people don't get punished and those kind of things. I'm saying we're at the end game now. At least that's what I feel.
All right. I mean,
Yeah, sorry.
yeah. I mean, certainly. Yeah, many like signs of the end of at least something. We've been talking for more than 2 hours, and I that's good for me. At some point, it's hard to keep the thread, but this was interesting. I'll keep several things
Please.
in mind. There's I mean the like what we said about rules and also like concrete like help let's say the rules and also the idea of studying theology when people are young. Those are the two big things I'll keep, and I'll see like what can be adapted in the context around me.
Argue a version of a Sabbath, detox day. I mean, with Silicon Valley already sort of adopting like a day where we don't have our phones, but it's more than just not having our phones. It's practice, removing yourself from the matrix. Like it's not that we can't, it's not that we're denying the simulation. I understand that I need to participate in simulation. I just don't have to be in it all the time, and I'm allowed to be aware of the divine simulation. So it's also the theology learning and the rules are best experienced in a day where they could best be experienced. As in, like, what is it like for you and your wife to walk around with the kids, really not be interrupted by the outside? To the level of saying, like, and we can't go so far because at some point, if we're going so far, now it's already turning into a mission, a journey, and that's also not what we're doing. We are being embodied. So, like, I think like a Sabbath, a version of Sabbath as well, ultimately, I think also has to be like some sort of mold that needs to be put inside as well. Because that is the space where that could be practiced and actually felt, and it has time to think about it. Because you have many things in your life, right? There's this thing happening, right? So like, when do I even have time to just, like I said, like I'm swimming to that ocean all week. The Sabbath, so where I can decompress. I would say the world is looking at like I can't wait for I can't wait for the weekend so I could club or do the other things that I want to do for myself. So like those are different visions. I hope this wasn't all over the place.
No, it's good. It's good. I'll think more about the Sabbath because I think I mean I know many Christians who do it like for whom Sunday is at least different, but I'll think more about like specifics in light of what you said, because for instance, it's true. Like we're lucky we just walk to church because we decided to live very close to our parish. But let's say if you need to just take your like all the kids in the car to go to church, it does become kind of a mission, and it's like not very restful. So yeah, I'll think more about that kind of thing and see how it fits into the other points of rules and education. But yeah, I mean, we've been talking about it 2 hours. We should
Yeah.
end it. But yeah,
So I appreciate this. I found it very enjoyable and fruitful. I hope you felt that it was informative. If you want to continue the discussion, I'll be happy to continue the discussion. We could talk about other topics, but I'm at your disposal. And I hope there's nothing I said that was, and if anyone will eventually see this once we post this, anyone that was offended, I'm sorry. I love you all. Everyone's great. We're just people being people.
perfect. All right. Thanks, Cassie, and thanks everyone for being here.
Everybody, we'll talk.